after high school, I got drafted into the military during Vietnam. After I came out, I returned to school. I had a family and I attended school at night for 8 years before I got my first degree. And then I went on to graduate school. But the way I got into printmaking is there was an activist in our community in Cleveland, Ohio, is where I grew up, who was attempting to raise monies for the ANC in South Africa. This is still during apartheid. And she had asked artists to create prints so they could be sold to the community to raise funds to support the ANC. And that was my first encounter and introduction to printmaking. And it stuck with me, not just because the medium, it was natural for me for the medium because the medium translated physically into a relationship with me that I had a real connection to. And I can explain that later. But it also taught me that art could be for the community's sake, not just for art's sake, but for our sake. So these prints were able to be sold to a large number of individuals. Each was, of course, signed and numbered. It was original lithograph. So this ideal that you could share with your community and share with the world. And the printmaking is thought of as the most democratic form of art making process because it's collaborative. Different individuals have different roles in the process. So for example, I'm publishing a work right now by Alfred Conte. Some of you might know of Alfred's work. He's out of Atlanta. He's becoming very successful, but you might want to write his name down, C-O-N-T-E-H, Alfred Conte. Well, we're producing his first print. Now, Alfred treats the surface of his paintings with a certain kind of texture and almost an oxidation on the surface. And so what we did is we created a sample for him on a copper plate that we oxidized and printed. And he was so taken by this that we are auditioning for the first time an actual copper metal plate. It will be an edition of 25 that will be inscribed by him. But the plate stands alone, not only as a fine print process, but stands alone as an art object. Now, they went on sale last week, and we've probably sold to 6 clients already. One client bought 3 of them. So you can imagine out of 25, the numbers are slipping away. So Sheila, you better do something soon.
I'm doing it now. I'm doing it.
Wait, how come I don't know about this?
Just coming out, but look, I mean, if you look at it.
I'm doing it now.
He's been compared to Alfred Conte, C-O-N-T-E-H.
So
and he's compared to Amy Sherrill, Kennedy Wiley, but I think of his work more like Huey Lee Smith because it has an existential, surreal quality to it. But his work is phenomenal. So do look at his work.
I love his work.
But we're publishing the first limited edition. We're doing a serigraph, a paper print that's an edition of 60. And then we're doing a limited print on copper plate of 25 only.
And that's your printmaking workshop.
My printmaking workshop.
So I should be contacting you.
Just send me a little email and we can take care of it.
I'm getting a pen.
All right. So anyway, Christina knows a lot about my work through the Driskell Center, but I run the only workshop in the country that has been founded and operates by an African-American in the country. Now, I studied with Robert Blackburn. Now, Robert Blackburn was the first African-American master printer, and he created the first nonprofit workshop in America. He printed artists like Jasper Johns, de Kooning, Grace Hardigan. It just goes down the list, as well as Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, Norman Lewis. I could go down the list. That was my teacher in New York City. So after I finished graduate school, I received a fellowship. And let me tell you how I got this fellowship. You asked about getting the printmaking. There's a gallery in Cleveland, in Shaker Heights, Ohio, which is near Cleveland, called the Malcolm Brown Gallery. And they were hosting a show by Elizabeth Catlett. Elizabeth Catlett was present at the opening, so me and my wife went to see her and meet her at the opening. I hadn't met her before. Well, while we were arriving on the parking lot, there was a fella that was in the middle of the street that was intoxicated. So we helped him go inside the gallery. It was Elizabeth's husband, who was intoxicated. So we struck up a friendship, and she began to correspond with my wife, and I began to write to her. So I wrote her a letter to Cuernavaca, Mexico. I said, Ms. Catlett, if you allow me to come and study with you, I will clean your studio, assist you in printmaking. I will rub your back. I'll do anything necessary because I want to get in that chain somehow, connect. And so I didn't hear anything from her. And one morning I was up in my bedroom and I was doing some kind of domestic chore and I get a phone call. And it's Robert Blackburn from New York. Now, I don't know, I couldn't speak at that moment because I was amazed that I was on the phone with Robert Blackburn. I'd only read about him, heard about him. He said, I understand you're going to Mexico to see Elizabeth Catlett. I said, I'm not sure. I never heard back from her. He says, well, I spoke to her and I want you to take some paper with you, some special paper to Mexico, because sometimes it's hard to get material outside of the country. And I said, well, you know, I can't just go because I haven't spoken to her. He said, well, call her right now. So I picked up the phone and I called Elizabeth Catlett. And she says, well, you can't come and work for me or with me because I had a back injury. But I asked Bob to give you a fellowship. So I was awarded a fellowship to his workshop in New York City. So I commuted back and forth from Cleveland to New York for a couple of years. And then I got an appointment at Lafayette College as a professor and continued to work with Bob for many years. Now, Bob, critical.
Can you mute your phone for me, please?
Yes, I'm trying to figure it out.
I got you.
So as I was saying, Bob was critical because Bob was a link not only with major African-American artists and major white American artists, but international artists. I worked with not only African-American artists, but I worked with artists like Grace Hartigan, Stephen Antonakis. Stephen Antonakis was a Greek artist that represented Greece and the Biennale. And so I had a chance to work with him, and he told me when he came to New York City in the 1960s, the first person he met was Bob Blackburn. And Bob invited him to come into the studio and work in the studio. And I remember telling Bob when I first got there, I said, well, Bob, I need an apartment or somewhere to stay. Can you help me out? Because I just got off a train at Grand Central Station. He said, well, no, I can't help you out. You can stay here at the studio. You can sleep on one of these presses. I said, sleep on a press? He said, well, yeah, Bearden slept on one. You can sleep on one, you know? So this was history. So it was important to me to continue that legacy. But I want to do that legacy just a little different. I wanted to tweak it. Bob struggled constantly financially. There have been times I was at the workshop and the landlord was there to evict him. So it was always hand to mouth, always a struggle. And Bob did everything for artists and nothing for himself. So by me going into an institution like Lafayette College, where I established the Experimental Printmaking Institute, was in the spirit of Bob Blackburn, but I wanted to do something a bit larger. I wanted to be far more international, and I wanted closer collaborations. So I have gone to now visit artists around the world and work with them. So I did a project and that was funded by Pittsburgh Foundation, where I invited 8 artists to participate in 8 master printmakers. So not only did the master artists make prints, but the printmakers made prints. Now that collection is called, the Artists and the Master Printers. And that collection is actually in Master Artists, Master Printmakers in the collection of the National Gallery. So you can see it if you like. But it was exceptional. We had artists from Japan, from Germany. We printed in Japan. We printed in Costa Rica. We printed all over the world. Now, why is this important? 2 reasons. The printmaking medium for committed artists and passionate artists is a viable medium that is used to express their creative vision. And it's a very important medium because it allows you to have language that you don't necessarily have in painting or sculpture, because it's accessible and it uses multiple materials and it collaborates with other individuals that have expertise. So we engage this kind of community in this making. So David Driskell comes to do a print with us. So we pre-sell the print and pre-subscribe it to a number of collectors. That is the underwriting of the project. Then we host a special event where the artist actually signs, gives a short talk, and the collectors are able to come in that evening and purchase a work from him at a pre-release price. After that price, the print is then put in the marketplace. Now, let's do a little conversation about price and affordability. The Alfred Conte paper print is being pre-released at $1,800. The print after the pre-release will be $1,800. The copper plate edition is being pre-released at $3,000. The retail price, market price after the pre-release will be $5,000. So the print allows a number of things to happen. It allows us to support the shop. It allows us to continue doing projects because Alfred provides no resource for us to do this. We do this ourselves and we recover our investment through the printing process. Now, when I ran the Experimental Print Institute for 25 years, it was all nonprofit. It was just to create opportunities for artists. We're no longer a nonprofit. We believe that we should be able to be successful as commercial publishers, but also we work with artists that we believe have the kind of reputation, the kind of experiences, and the body of work that is also going to be successful if it's not already. So we want to expand their possibilities. We want to expand their body of work. Now you can go back through history where there's Picasso, Miro, Bearden. You could just go through history. Jacob Lawrence, printmaking, whether it was etching, a lithograph, or stereograph, was central to their body of work and their career as artists. So it is also, sometimes the printmaking actually leads you to different places in your paintings. For example, my own personal work, a lot of my work has a graphic quality to it. So the printmaking sort of gives me this sensibility, this graphic sensibility that I bring into my paintings. And then my paintings bring a certain kind of subtlety into my printmaking. So the language, there's a conversation going on. So this is very important for an artist to experiment with the medium because it expands the language. It allows them to continue their aesthetic conviction, whatever it is, whether they're making abstract. I printed a lot with Sam Gilliam. We experiment with all kinds of materials. Sam would just do anything. Now, I've had other artists in the studio do almost anything also, and they would throw something against the wall and hope that it sticks. Didn't always stick, but Sam Gilliam, whatever he threw against the wall stuck because he was such a master at improvisation and had such a body of language. And he produced what I describe as intelligent art, smart art. And that is something we need to look for, is art that is smart, art that brings to us a certain kind of intellectual sensibility and thoughtfulness and sensitivity, because it's like singing. It's like listening to a Roberta Flack or Nina Simone, or listen to Beyonce, or listen to J-Lo, Jennifer Lopez. There's different qualities. Now, I don't think J-Lo or Beyonce can compare to Nina Simone or Roberta Flack in terms of quality, but everybody gets to sing whatever song they want to sing, right? But it's the quality and the character of the song that's being sung that is important. So I see a lot of artwork, especially in my role at the Driskell Center and working with artists. I see a lot of it. And what I'm always impressed by, especially those artists that have a conviction and a commitment to their work, understanding that the artwork and that voice is critical. And it's not predicated on whether the marketplace is interested. Sometimes the marketplace is interested, but it should be predicated on that. It should be predicated on the vision and the voice and the conviction of that individual artist. So I think when you look at collectors, like many of you are, you're selecting distinguished works by artists that have substantial careers, but also works that speak to you, also works that have a voice, also works that have a certain kind of intelligence and are not so simplistic, but can have layers and complications. And I think that's what printmaking allows for you. The piece behind Sheila is the piece by Richard Mayhew. So we did he's a watercolorist. primarily, but he works in oil too, but he does very beautiful watercolors. The reason that print has that appearance with the deckled edge and the bleed and the softness of watercolor is that we want it to mimic the quality of the stroke of the artist. We've done this with David Driskell. We've done it with other artists. You want to bring that language of that medium into the printmaking process. So,
Wow.
did I answer any questions here?
that was a mouthful. So you've already answered this question, and I've heard you speak before about meeting Elizabeth Catlett and working with her. Can you share some additional insights if you have them into your legendary career, collaborating with other legendary artists? I know, and I say this kind of really with all sensitivity, the phenomenal work that you did with your friend and colleague, Dr. David Driskell. I had the opportunity, Christina, to acquire the main suite, which is a portfolio of work by Dr. Driskell that Michael saw it when he was here, and it's something to behold, so much so that everybody has to even touch it, you have to wear gloves. I'm very sensitive about that. Devon can tell you that as well.
Of course.
Yes, yes.
Portfolio, if you look closely at the dates span almost a 5-year period.
Yeah.
We would make one and go about doing something else. And I only made them when I went to Maine, because I would go to Maine every summer to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, because I've had questions about this. Well, why are the dates different? Because we did one year, we did the other one the following year, although the theme was the same. The theme was continuing. I had worked with David since 2003. I worked with Faith Ringo for over 20 years, and we did over 50 different editions. I've done over 40 with David. Now, the reason that, to give you some more insight or deeper insight into this process, not everyone can be a master printer. What I mean by that, I'm not talking about training in the media, but an ability to be able to collaborate with another individual, to be sensitive to their aesthetics. And why these individual artists were comfortable with me, because I knew how to bag back. I knew how to be supportive of them. I knew how to provide resources. Sheila, you disappeared. Oh, there you are, okay. So I knew how to provide resources so they could achieve their aesthetic ambitions. But I also knew my role was to facilitate those goals, not to compete with them. So over time, artists would come to me. They'd come to the workshop. Mel Edwards, give you a story about Mel Edwards. Mel Edwards somehow found out about the workshop and came to visit me and asked, could he make some prints? And I said, yes. Then one day he came with this other artist, and this other artist was William T. Williams. And William T. asked, Mel introduced me by saying, for an artist, this is the next best place to heaven for an artist to come to this workshop. But William T. said, how many prints can I make, Curlee? I said, well, we like small editions, maybe 50, no more than 75. He said, no, you misunderstand. How many different prints could I make? You know? So we did about 6 or 7 different projects with William T. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is that this is just not an artist coming and paying a fee to have a work published. What we do is create an environment. Kevin Cole, for example, some of you know Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a place called Easton, PA, in a Williams Township that is next to it, and I live on top of a hill. And Sheila's been here before, and I have a schoolhouse built in 1902 that is my private studio, and then I have a printmaking facility. But artists come here and they stay in the residence, and they work, they have their meals here. So we create an environment by which they can be focused on their work and not be interrupted, and we provide everything they need. One case, when I was working with Sam wanted to make a print out of parachute fabric. So I had to get parachute fabric from Colorado, shipped in so Sam could make a print. So we did these beautiful editions for the National Black Arts Festival in Atlanta. And after we did it, Sam decided he didn't like it. So he cut the prints in half, and he liked the one half of the print. And that's the print he signed and sent to Atlanta. So we bought all this material. But the point is that you provide all the resources so that that artist can fulfill their visual dreams and ambitions. And there's a relationship, there's a sense of collaboration and regard. I mean, I've traveled with all these artists. I mean, I've traveled to Europe with David, to Japan, to Greece, to Mexico City, San Jose, producing his work and showing his work. And I did that with Sam. I used to travel with Sam Gilliam when we did work together. But you build this close relationship. And I would always step back. And my work was very private for me. And some collectors would buy it. But I give you an example of a collector buying my work. I live near Lewis Tanner Moore, and some of you know who he is. This is great-grandnephew of Henry O. Tanner. And he has a home on 20 acres, a plantation home, you know, that the family owned, and he lives there, and it's full of art. I can't even imagine how much art. Tanner's on the wall, Joshua Johnson's, the whole thing. So I get a phone call one night from him. He has a dinner guest, and the dinner guest expressed an interest in one of my large prints called The Power of the Melon. And it's a figure, hands holding melons. And it was a commentary on the melon in relationship to African-American culture, the watermelon. But also I saw a protest in southern Mexico once where the protesters were marching with little melons in their hands. So I wanted to bring that connection together. Well, he told me that the visitor who was having dinner with him, the collector, wanted the piece. And he said, Curlee, if I give him this piece, sell it to him, would you replace it? I said, of course. So he sold the piece. That was Dr. Robert Steele at the Driskell Center. And that's how I got involved with the Driskell Center.
Oh, wow.
That collector visiting another collector. So the point I want to make about collections is the network and the relationships. And it is about that. And artists, you got to understand how large the art world is. It's a very large, dynamic field. And I can remember as an African-American artist in Cleveland, when I was first starting out, Cleveland was split between about 50% African-American, the remainder was white, but that white was Jewish and Polish. So I'm an artist in Cleveland, Ohio, and I got a great deal of support from the African-American community. The Stokes brothers, Lou Stokes, the congressman, Carl Stokes' brother, and I could just go down the list. They were supporting the arts. So I get recruited to come to a meeting one night called the NOVA, the New Organization of Visual Arts. So I'm sitting in there, and it's about 300 white artists and 2 African-American artists, me and another artist that I knew. And I realized that if I bought into what they were talking about, I would have to compete with the 200 of them for half the population in Cleveland. I alone, as an African-American artist, had the other half on my own. And I probably had a larger studio than anybody in that meeting and was more successful than anybody there. So the point I'm trying to make is my art world was different than their art world, but it was a very satisfying and has been a very dynamic, enriching, and phenomenal art world. To give you an example, I was having dinner with Sam Gilliam, and it was a group of artists. This was at a restaurant in Washington, D.C., and we were talking. And I was talking about these major artists that if they called the museum, the director of the museum would pick up the phone. But for African-American artists, they wouldn't necessarily pick up the phone, you know, because they weren't significant enough. And Sam didn't like that. So I said, well, Sam, even if you called, they wouldn't pick up the phone. Well, you know, it was on. I don't know if you know Sam, but Sam would get into a fight in a minute. So we were at it, you know what I'm saying? And I told him, I said, Sam, every artist is jealous of you, black or white, the success you've had.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to your home. I know what your home looks like. I've been to your studio. You are one of the most successful artists in this country. You don't need to be a Rauschenberg, because Rauschenberg wish he could be you. You know what I mean? So what I'm trying to point out is that within the African-American community, we have dedicated collectors. We have great artists. And it's important to broaden as much as you can your landscape. But I'm saying that we have a home that we can nourish and embrace. And Sheila exemplifies this, Christina exemplifies this. So we don't have to go far from home to find the goods, you know, and the support.
So you talked about, you mentioned the David Driskell Center, and there are some participants on here tonight that may not be familiar with the Driskell Center. So could you share some information with us about the Driskell Center? I know that it's on the College Parks campus, and I think the campus is now closed.
It is closed.
But could you share and provide some information to those who are interested?
Everybody should go online and look up the Driskell Center if you're not familiar with it. Driskell
Yeah.
was established almost 20 years ago now. Originally, it's been in its present home since, I think 2006. And I came to the center, I think late 2012, but later before I became full-time. But the Driskell Center is a center dedicated to the documentation, celebration of the work of African-American artists out of the diaspora. So its mission and commitment is to not only recognize that work, to evaluate that work, but to broaden the appreciation by providing a home for artists, for curators, for historians. So we have archives also. We have the personal papers of David C. Driskell's, which is just phenomenal. You go in, and sometimes I go in and just read the letters from Elizabeth Catlett, from Norman Lewis, the note cards sent from Langston Hughes to David, and just go down the list. It's amazing. So we are sort of an organization that is the vault, so to speak, of culture. We protect it, we celebrate it, and we present it to the public. We have programs that surround it. We do collect, and we do receive collections. And of course, our namesake passed regrettably recently. It was heartbreaking to lose him. And I know Christina knows this too. How can you imagine him not being there with us? Very difficult, very painful. But we will continue, and we will honor him with excellence and appreciation and support of African-American artists, because that's what he was committed to. So it is our home. And our African-American artists and collectors should come to the Driskell Center because it was designed for you and to celebrate you and to support you. Does that help?
Yes, and just to share, there have been a number of exhibits that I've been blessed to attend there. But my wow moment, Mr. Curlee Holton, was attending the collector school a couple of years ago, and I was turned on to that by Mr. Quincy Lee, who's on here, and one of my dearest collector friends and mentors. He don't even know yet, but I guess he just found out. But it was a wonderful opportunity to network with other collectors and to learn more about collecting, and to know that some of the things that I have been doing during the course of my journey as a collector was actually on point. So that is for if they ever have an opportunity to convene another collector school series.
We've done 3 of them. They've been very successful, and people care a great deal about them. And we've been invited to mount one and present one in Houston, Texas, and also Atlanta, Georgia.
So you guys definitely should check it out, please. I mean, when I hear about it, I will forward that information to you guys, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to register.
So go online to the Driskell Center website. Also, if you want to learn more about the printmaking in my studio, you can go online to ravenfinearteditions.com, RAVEN finearteditions.com.
So it's interesting that you brought up the printmaking, because in our last couple of sessions, we have had some questions about printmaking, the different type of techniques out there. And so I was hoping, as you are the master, that you could share some information about the various types and techniques of printmaking with our participants.
You have some traditional forms that are relief printing. If you cut the surface of a print and remove part of the material, that could be wood, that could be other materials, and then roll ink over the top, you create a relief. Example of that would be Hal Woodruff's prints from the 30s. You have other artists that have done a lot of work that is wood cutter and relief. Of course, communicating the image from the top of the surface. Now, when you do intaglio, which is a metal plate that is incised, engraved, or etched, intaglio means it's below the surface. It means you created a depression in the plate, and then once you ink up the plate and move it through a press, the paper pulls the ink out. But you also get a certain kind of quality and texture. Then another would be the serigraph. The serigraph, they call it silk screen. It used to be made from silk, but now it's polyester. It has a dot pattern. And what you're able to do is imagine the screen is fully open with dot patterns. If you look at an article and a photograph in a newspaper and you get up close to it, you'll see a repetitive dot pattern. The closer the dot pattern, the darker the image is. So the screen creates a dot pattern. And there's an emotion or film that you can attach to the screen in areas that you want to protect, to keep the ink from passing through. That screen is then mounted on a frame and ink is passed across it. And of course, where those areas are open, the ink passes through. And that's how you get your image. So you're doing a screen per color. And you can print so tiny. They say you can print on top of a needlepoint head. I mean, it's so tight and so specific and so detailed. Now, there are other materials that artists experiment with in printmaking, collagraphs. Means to collage a surface. For example, you can take a piece of cardboard and you can glue on some burlap, you can glue on some sandpaper, and you can actually ink that and print it. So collagraph means to collage the surface. And there are other experimental mediums. Digital has made its way into it. Lithography is probably the first printmaking medium created in the 16th century. And what it is a limestone. You're actually drawing on a surface of a limestone with a grease pencil, and they had different hardness, and they can be very precise and very pointed and very soft. You draw on that surface, and then you treat that surface with a gum arabic. And what you're doing, you're etching or neutralizing the exposed surface. So you say you do an outline of a line, and then you're etching the remaining area. Where the grease line is actually protecting the stone. So then when you roll ink over that stone, it only attracts itself to the line that was covered with the drawing. So that's how you get the lithograph. Again, that's the surface printing as well. So many art, Jacob Lawrence is an artist that has used this. Romare Bearden is very popular. It was very popular in his work. Serigraph, when you look at Andy Warhol, you can go scale, Sam Gilliam. Lou Stovall did a lot of serigraphs, hand-cut serigraph. You can actually use a photographic method to make the screen, or you can actually hand cut them. For the Richard Mayhew, which is behind Sheila, is Richard actually took clear Mylar and actually did a painting wash on the Mylar with Indian ink. Added water to it so it became soft. He did this on every layer of color. We would take that Mylar, create a photographic screen that we would then print that color from. So there are probably 20 colors on that print. But you look at it and you say, well, there's a yellow in the foreground, a pink, a red, a brown, a purple. But there are about 20 colors in there to make that happen.
Wow. Wow.
Those are all sold out.
Wow. It is, every time I look at it, you know, I tell people that most people come into the dining room to eat. I come in the dining room to look at, I have on this wall, I have this piece, and then on the opposite wall, I have summation. And it just, it's one of those, it's kind of like a wow for me. It's kind of like a wow.
And Tuscadora, we had a paper mill make the paper because it was so large. They would have three guys and make a sheet, and it would take so long for that sheet to dry. So it took 100 pounds of pulp to make that sheet. So we had, I think we did an edition, I can't recall the exact number now, maybe up to 100. And that was laborious, and they had to ship the paper in from Ohio. And it was, and we wanted a little texture on it. So if you look closely, you'll see a little texture on the surface because they wanted to read like a canvas. So you're all kinds of things you can do with the medium. And most artists don't know the range. They're just not aware of the range unless they've taken a printmaking course or got involved with printmaking.
Okay. So, hey, this is my last question, and then we can open it up. We're doing really good. So, Curlee, what pearls of wisdom can you share with collectors? We have collectors on here at various stages of their journey. Like we have some that are just starting. We have artists here. We have some that are just starting. We have some that have been collecting for a while. We have some folks that have maybe 10 to 20, and then we have some folks that have over 100, 200, 300, 500 or more works. So what pearls of wisdom could you share with collectors? Hey, James, how you doing? What pearls could you share with collectors, no matter where they are?
I mentioned this before, as I call it smart art. And I just said smart art because you want to look for something, a work of art that really speaks to you and have content and quality and reveals artistic conviction of the artist. And that distinguishes the work. So being introduced to a work of art, and it's always best if you can to go to the artist's studio, as you do, to see those works. You can actually sometimes see them in process. You can see them in relationship to other works. So you can see the artist as on a certain kind of journey. And I think that's important because you want that artist not necessarily to make the same image, but you want to know that you're investing in the work of an artist over a long period of time. So you should look for quality art and smart art. And that means you have to be informed as a collector. So you have to know what you're looking at. I've gone into exhibits and asked them to change titles because they mislabeled works of art. They call it one medium when it's another medium. So you got to know what you're looking at, and there's ways to know that. The next thing I think is to be open, not only to acquire the works of master artists. That's always important to try to do. Like Sheila has this masterpiece by Elizabeth Catlett. So you acquire masterworks. You acquire masterworks, especially if you're committed to this.
Right.
And the reason I told them you had that piece because it was on your book. So I did. But at the same time, you want to acquire works of artists that are not well known and underrepresented. Can you imagine had you bought Amy Sherrill when she first came on the scene? They're $225,000 now. Alfred Conte, you could have bought them for $500. So buying a young artist, and that allows that artist to sustain themselves. So not only is it about buying that artist, but supporting that artist. I went to a collector's home, very well-known collector. If I mentioned his name, you would know him. He has a home in Pennsylvania, a home in New Jersey, and a home in Martha's Vineyard. And I've been to all those homes and looked at his collection. Recently, he had on the wall a original painting, small painting by Jacob Lawrence. Not a print, but an original painting, and it was a beauty. You don't see them very often. It was a beauty. But he said he decided to stop buying art of deceased artists. He was only buying art of living and working artists because he had bought a piece from one artist, young artist, and he was in communication and becomes friends with artists, and the artist was having such a struggle financially. He had told him that if he didn't do something soon, he would have to go teach, but he wanted to practice. So this collector purchased a number of works so he wouldn't have to teach. So he decided that his commitment as a collector would be to help artists survive. So he shifted his focus from collecting the masters to collecting young working artists, emerging artists. And I think that's great. So you have a theme, you have a focus of your collecting, which is important. And the thing that Bearden told me, I met Brooklyn Bearden once and I asked him and I was a young man, what advice you give a young artist? He says, document everything. Document your work. Record your work. Assume that the work is going to become important. Because if it arrives and it's not documented, you will suffer because of it. So let me give you a real life example of that. I was asked to curate a retrospective for Paul Keene. Paul Keene was an artist in Philadelphia, outside of Philly. Great artist, classically trained, was in the military as an artist, told me he went to an opening one night and there was a great crowd and he saw Pablo Picasso in the crowd. So he has these great stories and he was a phenomenal artist. Well, when we were doing the catalog, retrospective, he didn't have any work documented. He had a few pieces that slides from the 1970s. And he couldn't tell me where the work was at in different collections. So how do you pull that together? Now, at this point, he was probably 70 years old when we did this. So we spent all our time trying to find the work, and then we brought in a researcher to actually help us find the work, and then to photograph and shoot the work. Now, Paul was as a young artist, he had gotten a award to travel to Haiti to study the Rosenwald Scholarship. I think he got to go to Haiti and study. Came back, was shown at the Carlton Gallery. Now, the Carlton Gallery was famous because it was the gallery that discovered Horace Pippin. So they were showing Paul Keene. Paul was showing in New York. Paul, it was going on. But Paul decided to stay in Philly, start his family, and got a position teaching at the local Bucks County Community College. One thing that was clear to me is he made certain choices. Wonderful wife, wonderful family, but he made certain choices that also prevented him from establishing himself in a larger way, internationally and nationally, because of those choices. So artists can sometimes get in their own way. So we have to be mindful of that, be careful of that.
Interestingly enough, we got two questions that you've already answered.
So
that's a great thing. You did. So there was one for collectors. Can you ask him what advice he would give? He's already done that. And then what advice would he give to young and mid-career artists? And you've already done that as well. So I'm going to open up the floor for those that did not already put their questions in the chat. We have some people that came online a little bit after I had said that. So does anyone have any, Christina had to step off, Curlee, but
make sure you get that contact information.
Yes, I will. And you should have something in your inbox because I took care of that. I'm not, ooh, Quincy. We need to talk about that because Alfred also sent it out to a few of us via Facebook Messenger. So I got his a couple of days after you sent me yours. I'm so thankful that I did that tonight because I would have lost out or missed out. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Holton? Rocky, unmute, please.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for all this information, first of all, because I'm learning so much. Okay, my question is kind of about Blackburn and how he seems to have lived his life. What are the lessons you've learned from your own life or from observing other people's lives? Like, what have you learned about reconciling kind of like this artistic spirit of like generosity and like providing and like all that kind of stuff? Like the idea of like kind of like an artist with like practical realities of the world, like the fact that like the collector was like knocking on his door. And how did you find people have like maintained their artistic integrity amid all of like the world's realities?
Yeah, I think you raised a number of questions, and for me, I separate those issues. For one, is I believe it's important to share with the community, because when that community learns about you, that community also connects with you.
Mhm.
And you develop a relationship. And to me, relationships are the most important thing. That you build a relationship. You build a relationship not only with community, but you build relationships with collectors, and you build relationships with other artists, because those artists will include you. There's a big collector in New Jersey called the Petrucci Collection. Have you heard of it? Petrucci, Petrucci. Go online and look at that collection. Beresford Booth is a curator of that collection. He acquires the work. Beresford Booth is a long-term friend of mine. So he's come to my studio and purchased works, and I recommend artists to him. So I want you to reach out to Petrucci Collection, and you write me an email, and I pass on Beres's number and give you, not his number, but I'll communicate by email and introduce you to him. So that's the network that's been provided to me, and it's important to provide it to others, because this thing grows. This thing is, generosity doesn't mean you lose anything at all. You gain from it. Your humanity is expanded by it. And I don't covet many things. I covet my practice. I don't covet things so much, but my practice. And for me, my practice, and I'm sure it is for you also, we make objects because we want to access the divine. We make an object, and we hope that that object, that painting, is perfect. And that notion of perfection is that it transcends the material and transcends us. To me, that is an engagement of the divine. There are many ways to do this. You don't have to be an artist to do this. You can build a house on the hill, spend your entire career building something, because you believe, if I build this thing, somehow I will be lifted from my reality and have an experience that's transcendent. To me, that's what we do as artists. So part of that for me is to be crystal clear on what you are doing as an artist, to practice your calling, and the world will catch up with you. That's what I believe. But you also have to be accessible. I believe it's important to be accessible, but not familiar. Let them get to you. Let the clients get to you, collectors get to you, but that doesn't mean they need to know you. You follow what I'm saying? Because they're knowing you, that intimacy is what allows you to practice. I work in the studio privately. I don't even want my children to come in, my grandchildren, or my wife to come in, because that space is a space that I want to maintain in a way as a temple, as a place that I can engage the divine. And I'm not talking about religion. Don't get confused by that. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about transcendent moments where that warm wash goes over your brain and you know you've hit it, you got it, when what you made is larger than who you are.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? When it's larger than who you are. And it doesn't have to be painting. It could be what Sheila's doing. Sheila's bringing us into the circle. And there's a great African saying, it takes all hands held around the Balboa tree to know the truth.
Yeah.
So you got to be at the table. You know, I have to be at the table. Now, will anybody pay attention to me while I'm doing the work? Maybe, maybe not. But the reason I've gotten some attention to my work was because of my generosity and support of others also. So Collectors of Davids has also bought my work. I did a show at University College, at University of Maryland. I did a one-person show there, and there was Kevin Cole, Ulysses Marshall, Sam Gilliam, David Driskell, Nelson Stevens. Now, people were amazed that all these major artists were coming out to see Curlee, and most of them didn't know I made art. They didn't know it, but it was because of my relationship with them. They had regard for it because I had regard for them. So I think that is part of my personality, but generosity, I think, is a very important thing because it generates opportunity for yourself. And to find a way to have that work, I mean, to really get close to that work, So the work sustains you. And I think the world would catch up with that. Now, we all compromised a little bit along the way. I mean, I taught longer than I wanted to teach. I had images made of works that I had made it because someone asked me. But it was never really about economics. It was about trying to build a reputation. But I hope, does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, definitely.
Now,
Thank
the
you.
difference with Bob is that Bob did it for everyone but himself. So I tell you what I did. I got a phone call, because it was a generation of us that had worked with him, not just me. But some of those artists would say to me, like Robin Holder, Curlee, you got to do something, Curlee. You got to do something for Bob. I arrive at the Driskell Center years later, and we mount a Bob Blackburn retrospective. His work had never been shown like this. And the moment that opening occurred, I thought to myself, this is why I'm here. I'm here for Bob. I'm here to pay homage and to acknowledge Bob, the work that he'd done for all of us. So it's important to think about why you do what you do, you know, why you make the work you make. And the world catch up with you. I honestly believe that. So have the faith. Don't lose the faith. Stay strong.
Thank you.
Hey, Curlee, it's Quincy. Hope all is well. Good to talk
Long
to you.
time, long time.
Yeah. Hey, can you speak to? You've had a prolific career as an artist, a incredible career as a printmaker. Would love for you to share how you go about determining as a printmaker who you work with.
Wow.
Because I think that's telling about how you look at it as well. Because that's you. It's almost like you're curating who you work with, if you know what I mean.
Ways, yeah. You know, early on, I was just so committed to working with other artists and celebrating those artists, and that probably came from Bob Blackburn. This idea of community. So that was always important to me, and giving artists opportunity, because I was in a privileged position as a professor at Lafayette College, a very rich institution. So I could support those artists coming. Plus there was no diversity. I was a second African-American professor there. There were some West Indian professors from Africa. I was the second African-American. The first African-American in the history of that institution to receive an endowed chair. I was only the third endowed chair held by an African-American in visual arts in the entire country. So I was in a position where I reallocated resources from the institution to support these artists coming. We would send them airline tickets, housing, stipends, food, everything would be provided, and everything they needed to make art. Latin America, South Africa, because I was interested in also expanding my knowledge and my relationships with people around the world. I'd always been a traveler. I grew up, my most favorite book was books about travel, and National Geographic was my Bible, you know? I love that book when I was a young kid, because you could see the world. Well, I wanted to actually go to that world, and I did. That was during that 25 years, because it was at Lafayette, I was an educator. And, you know, a lot of the artists that came that were distinguished artists, like Sam and others, were also invited by the institution to do prestigious residencies. And that's how I met Sam. He was a visiting artist. That's how I met Faith. But I had met Faith's daughter, Michelle. I don't know if you know Michelle Wallace, the author. I met her before I met Faith.
Yeah.
But I had worked with Faith for almost over 20 years. So working with artists like that, and these were artists that also believed in giving you opportunity. Why would Faith print with me? Why would Sam print with me? Richard Mayhew. I called Richard Hunt recently for an exhibition I'm putting together called The Four Horsemen at the September Great Gallery in Atlanta. It opens up on May 9th, a virtual exhibition, The Four Horsemen. Sam Gilliam, Mel Edwards, William T. Williams, and Richard Hunt.
Wow.
So I've never printed Richard Hunt's work. So I called Richard and I says, Richard, I'd like to put together a show. Is there any way I can get some of your work? Now, the way I got to Richard's number in the call was I called a collector. who was a
Yeah.
friend of mine, and asked would she let him know I was going to call. So I called. He answered the phone, and I was a little nervous. I had never spoke to him before. And well, I spoke to him in passing, but never about his work. And I said, this is Curlee Holton. He says, I know who you are. I said, but this is Curlee Holton. I'm a printmaker. I work with, he says, I know who you are. You don't need to keep introducing yourself. I know who you are. So my reputation now had preceded me. So I had talked with Kerry James. I'd been to his studio, Amy Sherrill, and people like this. So they knew who I was. So because of that commitment to work with these artists and to create opportunity for nonprofit reasonings, I mean, it was philanthropic. And then when I retired, I decided to create a workshop that wasn't philanthropic, because there were opportunities to publish works by artists that I had turned down, because in a nonprofit institution, you can't engage in commercial publications.
Right.
So now I engage in those publications. Have you heard of R.V. Smith? Do you know R.V. Smith's work?
Yeah.
Write that down, R.V. Smith, A-R-V-I-E. We're publishing in his work right now. Are you familiar with, oh, I can't think of her last name now. She's out in Houston.
Delita?
Delita Martin. You know Delita Martin's work?
Yeah.
We're working with Delita Martin now. And of course, we're doing the Alfred Conte.
Right.
So we work with artists to produce prints, a body of work that adds on to their collection. Is that a Joshua Johnson on that wall back there, or is that a banister? That's a banister, isn't it?
Yeah, banister. You got a good eye. You got a good eye.
I see something over in the corner.
Yeah, we looking. So yeah, that's how you're curated in the sense that there are artists you love to work with, artists that approach you. But now I'm far more selective about it, because I have a goal now to do some significant things with artists that have an audience and a reputation. That's important to me now.
No, I think that's great. I appreciate the feedback. I always wonder, because some of the artists you named, Delita, Martin, Alfred Conte, I mean, they're making waves right now as far as their work. And so it's always interesting when you, and I always think about printmakers as when you get a print or a reproduction of your work, and you said this before, if you get it done through a printmaker, it's like its own body of work, right?
Absolutely. You know, when you know that and you get involved with that, you know, the artist is making the marks, the artist is making the plates with you, artist selecting the color. This is not a facsimile.
Right.
This is a work of art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. Good to see you.
Anyone else have any? Because good to see you, Quincy.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else have any questions? We are at 8:09. Maybe a couple more minutes. Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Curlee, hi, it's Michael Gibson. Can you talk about?
We talked before. Do I know you?
Yes, we talked. I was supposed to come out to Philly to spend time with you, but we missed each other. I was coming in for a show and you were going out.
Yeah.
So I hope to, hopefully, once all of this COVID-19 stuff blows over, to come and spend some time with you. But I wanted to ask you a question with regards to, in terms of the way you practice your printmaking. Hopefully you could share how important, you touched on it a little bit, but how important it is for that relationship that you have with the artist, and the connection that you have to have with the artist that you're working with in order to propel the work to another level beyond what it is as it existed before.
Yeah, that's a good question. Many times we'll invite artists that have no knowledge about printmaking at all. We actually prefer that, so that they don't bring this baggage with them, these notions. We had Chakaya Booker in the studio. We had Chakaya Booker, Mel Edwards, and William T. in the studio. No, Sam Gilliam in the studio at the same time. She would not touch anything because she was so intimidated by the medium, and probably intimidated by being in the room with Sam and Mel Edwards, you know. But she was so intimidated by the medium because she didn't have any language with it. We did do a project very elaborate, multiple medium project. But what happened, because she's a sculptress, she pushes the boundaries, the way in which she deals with the material. The printmaking boundaries are pushed. So we do cut plates. We incorporate laser cutters. We've done this with Mel Edwards, where we have laser cutters actually cut the plates. I go to an engineering company, have the plates cut, large plates, and then we would relief roll them. We actually ended up producing a series of cut plates with Mel Edwards. And then we produce an edition of prints. As a result of producing the prints, the university president, college president, became aware of Mel's work and asked about having commissions. So we were able to arrange for Mel to have a commission of one of his large stainless steel pieces built on campus. And we helped underwrite that installation, that commission, with the prints that we sold. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is beyond just the medium. It's about somehow extending the language of the medium so that the artists can express themselves in their particular language. Give you another example. When we started working with David Driskell, we invented this technique called textured serigraphy, texture. So what we would do is we would print multiple layers of emotion, then print color. So you would have a raised line like a brushstroke. And not only that, you would get a halo around the line. What I mean by that is the screen would hit the top of the textured line and just drop over to the edge. And sometimes there would be a gap. So you would get the white of the paper coming through like a halo. So we would play with those. So that also meant every print was unique. So again, finding the language for an artist helps push the medium and have the medium work for you. For example, I would never touch a silk screen. I was an etching, lithography, calligraph. It had to be real physical for me, not silk screening. But I tell you how I got to silk screening. One day I took an open screen, no image on it, and I printed a block of yellow, big screen, maybe 32 by 40. And then I took what they call a blockout liquid, and it's like nail polish, for example. I painted in that area that I want to keep yellow. Then I print the next color orange. Then I paint over it again the color I want to keep there was orange. Then I print red, purple, blue, black, and what was left was just enough to print that black. This is called reductive sonography. Now, this was made popular, not the serigraph, but the reductive print was made popular by Picasso. Some of you know his work. He's done a large series of portraits of his wife, maybe wives. I don't know if it's singular or plural, but anyway. So that means that every time you print, you're cutting away or you're painting. So this is what we call an original print. An original print. So it can be an actual work of art. So I print 10 of them every time. 10 yellow, then take that 10 and print the orange. So every one of them is just a little different. I would even shift the screen. Mm-hmm. Move the screen, unlock the screen, move it over 2/8 of an inch, print so it's offset. And then because of that offset, it was moving the colors over, I would then print a border around the whole thing. I was having fun, you know, and artists were having fun and discovering things. So yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
It's experimental. For example, your work has a natural affinity to both etching, dry point, and lithography.
Mm-hmm. I'm coming to see you. I'm coming to see you.
Out of the water.
Yeah.
We're going to add relief to it. So those white areas will pop out beyond the tolerance of the paper. You look and say, how can that paper come out that far?
Yeah.
We would create texture on those surfaces for you.
Okay, well, I'm going to come see you. We'll figure out a time once this crazy COVID-19 and I could actually get across the border, because right now the borders.
It's affecting us here too.
Yeah, it's affecting everything. So we'll talk.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I have one more question, and then I'm actually good. So if anybody else have a question, you better get it in before we closing it in. So So Curlee, one of the first time when I first came out to your studio and the actual shop, totally overwhelmed. But one thing that I will never forget is I wandered way over to the far wall where you had a number of books and catalogs, right? And actually,
with some.
yes, I did. And actually, Eileen Berger from Just Looking really got me, and Dennis Forbes really started me into acquiring books about art and African American art, and doing the research and studying and learning about the artist, the technique, and so on and so forth. And then to come to your studio and find catalogs upon catalogs upon catalogs and books. For those of you that may not be aware, there was a book called The Retrospective, or about Charles White.
Yes, yes.
And that's the first place I saw it, was at Curlee's shop. And I was thinking, can I get this one? He said, oh no, you better order that one online. And so I was able to get it just before it sold out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right in Chicago. So what would you share with collectors about, just kind of also considering to build their library of in catalogs and things of that nature of the artists?
It's important to have the catalogs, not only of your work, but of other artists' work that you respond to and appreciate, both collectors and artists. I read a lot about artists. Right now, I'm looking at a lot of work about George Tookers, and I'm interested in how he does the surface. I'm reading a big 500-page book of Leonardo da Vinci. And what we need to be is make sure we're informed about what we're doing and be knowledgeable about this. And collectors are not just knowledgeable about the artists that you have, knowledgeable about the history and trends. That's very important. And also, I know you're interested in value in the marketplace too. I know Halima Taha is working on a next volume of her book, not only about African-American marketplace for art, but also other countries of the diaspora. So it's about how you build that value also, and collectors help you build that value. For Michael and also Rocky, I don't know if your work is in institutional collections yet at this time. Might be, might not be. But it's an important thing to do. Now, the question is, how do you approach an institution? Sometimes you get invited to an exhibition, or you get invited to an event at a college, not a college, but the museum, and you'll meet the curator. And you say, well, can you come over to my studio? Most of them won't come, though, because a lot of people are asking them. So it's a tough game, and you can send in slides. They don't want you to send in a disc. You want to go online. So it's a tough game. However, one way to get in that door, especially as an African-American artist, if your work is donated to that institution. So now, Michael and Rocky, you need to make sure that Sheila and others have your work so they can make a gift to an institution. And when it's gifted to the institution, it automatically becomes a part of your resume, list of items. It's important to start doing it. I have work in Yale and other 16 different museum collections. Half of those museums, my work was given to those museums by collectors and donors, and half of those institutions. And 2 of them, I actually sold a body of work to, and 1 I made a donation, a gift. Now, how does that benefit the collector? If that collector donates that work to, for example, the Driskell Center, and it has a market value of $5,000. And if you had that in a gallery and was selling for $5,000, normally an artist would get half of that, $2,500. If that was sold to that collector for $2,500, that collector could then make a donation to an institution and is able to deduct the value of that, market value of that piece she donated. So she gets to write off the $5,000. You got $2,500, plus you're now in a museum collection. How's that sound? Does that make sense?
That makes total sense, yeah.
Show you something I did, show you how this works. I did the first big project with David Driskell. And we published this in San Jose, Costa Rica. Took David, filmmaker, 2 printmakers with me, 2 students with me, and we published it in Costa Rica. Rented a big print facility, cook, everything, hotel. We pre-subscribed that edition of 60 to 25 collectors, and they each got 2. They had a subscription fee that they paid, the value of 1. Then we had an appraiser come in to appraise that individual print, and they all got a copy of that appraisal. So just to give you a frame of reference, say they gave me, the subscription fee is $2,000, sake of conversation. They received 2 prints of David's valued at $4,000 each. They were asked to donate one of those prints to an institution that David Driskell wasn't in. And they did. So 20 different museums.
That's how you do it.
We did well. David's in 20 museums. The collector has one that they keep and one that they've given, and they get to write off for the $4,000 donation. We have to be creative about this, resourceful. An artist can do this in collaboration with the right kind of person. And everybody is generating. I mean, and guess what comes out of this? The work comes out of this. The artist now is able to create the work and has now a reputation by being collected by museums. So have a conversation with Sheila and some other collectors.
And Quincy.
And Quincy knows this. And, give some things to the Driskell Center in honor of Dr. Driskell. How about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Curlee, you're spot on. I'm actually on the collections board at the Mint Museum.
There you go.
We evaluate all the time works coming in, and you're spot on around a lot of times works, especially by Black or African American artists, will come in through donation from a collector's estate, and what happens is it may be 10 works that come in. And yeah, we may look at, a Charles White, but if there's an Alfred Conte, we're not going to get rid of that, right? It becomes part of the collection. I think you're spot on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's good for the artist because you build your resume, your background, and you build value for your work. And this is how you establish prices for your work also. So we do it with a lot of young artists at the Driskell Center. We're open to their work coming to the collection. I've actually had some that have shown at the Driskell Center, and next thing I noticed, they're in the collection of the Driskell Center. It was the same when I was a young artist. I started out in Detroit. I used to go to the Black Arts Festival in Detroit, Michigan, and the gallery that's showing work. He said, "Remember, Curlee, if you fly over Mexico, you've been to Mexico."
Wow.
That's advice to the artists.
Wow.
All these things are possible, and we deserve success. We deserve it.
Yes,
it's all
do.
very possible.
Yes.
And we have our little cottage industry, David Driskell had his. Bearden had his. Faith Ringo has hers. These don't cross-pollinate necessarily. Build that little cottage industry and make sure you have what you need. And that's what I've tried to build. I'm trying to build a colony here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to build a 3rd building. My wife won't let me,
Anyone else have any questions about it's 8:24. So this is the last call for questions. Last call.
Okay, go online, Driskell Center and Raven Editions, and take a look, okay?
Yes. So
Thank you.
You guys have been fantastic. Curlee Holton never disappoints. I'm telling you, the last time I was in the studio, the only reason I left is because it was getting dark. You kind of get lost there. Curlee, thank you so much for sharing and pouring into each one of us, artists and collectors alike. I know I will be seeing you soon because I just took care of something on my iPad. And I'm really excited about that. I've been wanting Quincy knows this, I've been wanting an Alfred Conte piece for, a couple of years now. So I'm really excited to actually add that to the collection.
Doing great work.
Yes. So next week.
Well, and again, Michael and Rocky,
Mhm.
one of those collectors, get us a piece in the Driskell Center. All right,
Yes, sir.
Okay.
start that collection.
Next week, you guys will be back at 7 o'clock. Michael C. Gibson will be our guest, facilitator, speaker, what have you, our guest artist. And so we're looking forward to having you back. For those of you that can make it, for the rest of you, please be safe out there in this COVID-19 new normal. You guys be safe. Curlee, we will be talking soon. Any final words?
Especially us. Let's be careful.
Yes. Okay, guys, be safe out there. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you,
I'm
everybody.
going to be calling you shortly. Talk to you later. God bless.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, Sheila.
Bye.
Thanks, Sheila. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for the invite.
Thanks.